It was 2005 when Brisbane's Lisa Cox caught a rare form of Streptococcus A, leading to a brain hemorrhage that resulted in over a dozen operations and procedures.
I didn't have a disability for the first 24 years of my life, but as soon as I became disabled, I suddenly had to dress very differently. So I now have a prosthetic leg, I'm permanently seated in my wheelchair, and I can no longer do up buttons because I'm missing my fingertips. But that didn't mean that fashion was no longer required. And people sometimes wrongly make the assumption that once you acquire a disability or when you have a disability, that all sense of fashion is not required. And nothing could be further from the truth, because people with a disability still want to look good.
Despite 1 in 5 Australians having some form of disability, until recently, this entire community had been completely excluded by designer fashion labels. But according to leading fashion commentator Glenys Trail-Nash, that's finally beginning to change, thanks to the rapidly growing market of adaptive fashion.
So adaptive fashion caters specifically to people with disabilities, and when you think about that, perhaps the first thing that comes to your mind is people in wheelchairs, people with prosthetics, and it is that, but it's also even things like autism, where people have sensory issues and the skin is super hypersensitive to fabrics and the feel of fabrics. So it is a very wide-ranging term, and increasingly it's getting a lot of interest. The global adaptive fashion market is expected to hit $400 billion by 2026 or 27. And the things I've read suggest that Australia has like 1.5% of that. That's still a big number to tap into.
One of the most popular Australian brands tapping into this market is Christina Stevens, a label founded by Queenslander Jessie Sadler.
So I became interested in the adaptive fashion space about 7 years ago after my mum had a fall and damaged her arms. Dressing was difficult for her, it was painful. She was unable to move her arms freely, so as you can imagine, getting dressed in a shirt or a dress would be difficult. And the other challenge we were experiencing was that what was available out there looked like a hospital gown. It was unisex, it was one size fits all, and that's not up my mum's alley. I think it would be a bit more edgy if we had...
Took it off a bit to the side.
Yeah.
Jessie's business partner is Carol Taylor, who is proud to call herself the world's first quadriplegic designer.
Lilac.
Yay!
You know, my love of fashion didn't change after my spinal cord injury. I loved it before, I loved it just as much after. However, I found myself immediately excluded from the fashion conversation. And that immediately meant that shopping became a very lonely experience, and in fact really impacted my PTSD and depression during a time that I was already having to adjust to so much.
Your beautiful artwork has printed out beautifully.
For generations we've had able-bodied people designing for people with disability, and there's just no comparison to lived experience of disability. You don't realise what a bank of knowledge, I didn't realise what a bank of knowledge 20 years in a chair has given me until you start problem solving. But aesthetically, I agree, it doesn't look great. So fashion does so much more than just, cover us up and keep us warm. It goes to one's core sense of identity, to your sense of self. It affects one's confidence. But most importantly, it has a direct impact on the way the world perceives you.
Last year, this movement finally stepped into the spotlight at Australian Fashion Week, where Christina Stevens' designs were featured in the festival's first ever adaptive fashion runway.
We had overwhelming success. We had a standing ovation at the end, which was beautiful. We had probably the largest media coverage of the week.
It was a great feeling being out there along with everybody else with a disability in Carol's design. It was an important step. Obviously a long way to go, but it was one piece of the jigsaw to move the conversation forward in terms of the representation of disability in the bigger picture of popular culture.
So you've got Tommy Hilfiger, you've got Nike, a number of international brands, Target in the US, for example, Zappos, who are now adding a category to what they already deliver to people. I think when you get those big brands doing it, I think then that's when the real shift starts happening, because that's when you get that real recognition, that broader recognition, and other brands go, well, maybe we should be playing in this space as well.
We feel very strongly that people with disability should have access to the same retail therapy experience as everyone else. And I think that in that respect, adaptive clothing is where plus-size clothing was 15 years ago. We're on the precipice of a revolution.
Being able to dress yourself, being able to be independent with your fashion choices, and being able to just get out of bed, choose what you want to wear and put those clothes on independently as an adult is a game changer. It sounds so simple, but it really is a big deal.